Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're plunging headfirst into a life as turbulent and profound as the novels it spawned. Imagine a writer who found his deepest spiritual truths, not in, serene contemplation, but in the crucible of suffering. A man whose very existence was a dramatic, complex narrative in itself, a paradox of faith forged in doubt. It's a compelling idea, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It really
Like
did.
the most profound understanding might come not from comfort, but from the edge, really, of human experience.
It absolutely is. And what's truly compelling about Dostoevsky is this persistent, almost agonizing duality. I mean, he was a Christian who remarkably constructs some of the strongest cases for atheism you'll find anywhere in literature.
Yay.
Yet at the same time, he was a soul who simply could not get God out of his mind,
Yeah.
constantly wrestling with faith and doubt. This internal conflict, this profound tension, it defines not just his most memorable characters, but the very fabric of his personal journey from start to finish.
That's a powerful way to frame it. Our mission today, then, is to undertake a deep dive into the extraordinary arc of Fyodor Dostoevsky's life. We're going to trace his existence from, the moment he drew his first breath to his final exhale, dissecting every facet and nuance with utmost care and intellectual rigor. We'll delve into his formative years, the essence of his groundbreaking writing, the intricate psychology of his characters, his profound philosophical inquiries, the relentless psychological struggles he endured, his health afflictions, and of course, the deeply impactful personal relationships that shaped him. And central to it all, the profound transformation wrought by his experiences with incarceration.
And for this journey, we're incredibly fortunate. We can draw from such a rich tapestry of sources, comprehensive biographical accounts that paint a really detailed picture of his daily life, insightful, critical analyses of his masterworks that unpack their complex meanings, and perhaps most revealingly, Dostoevsky's own intensely personal letters and diaries. This combination, it allows us to build a truly multifaceted understanding, almost like participating in a scholarly dialogue ourselves, piecing together the puzzles of his mind and his world.
It's like we're sifting through an intellectual archaeological dig, really, extracting the most important nuggets of knowledge from this vast ocean of information. Our goal is to give you a comprehensive shortcut to being truly well-informed about this literary titan, to feel like you've engaged in a deep, scholarly conversation about him. So let's begin at the very beginning with his formative years. Fyodor Dostoevsky entered the world on November 11th, 1821, in Moscow. He was the second child of Dr. Mikhail Dostoevsky, and his childhood setting was, to say the least, unique. Imagine growing up literally on the grounds of the Mariinsky Hospital for the Poor, which was situated in what was considered a lower-class district on the edges of Moscow.
Yeah.
This wasn't a pristine, isolated upbringing. It was right in the thick of human suffering.
That early environment was profoundly influential, a truly formative crucible. It exposed him directly from a very young age to what the sources call the lower end of the Russian social scale.
Mm-hmm.
Picture a young Dostoevsky playing in the hospital gardens, encountering not just patients from the lowest strata of society, but also the staff, the guards, the families of the sick. These direct, unfiltered encounters with the marginalized, the suffering, the downtrodden, they would quite literally populate his future works. It gave him an intimate, raw look into lives often entirely unseen or ignored by the more privileged classes of Russian society, shaping his acute sense of social injustice and his profound empathy for human misery.
It's fascinating how early his literary awakening began, especially given that environment. From the tender age of 3, his nanny, Elena Frolovna, a figure he would later speak of with immense affection and respect, she would read him heroic sagas, enchanting fairy tales, captivating legends.
Wow, from 3.
Yeah. Imagine those stories, filled with grand adventures and moral dilemmas, shaping such a young, impressionable mind. Then, at 4, his own mother, a deeply devout woman, took on the role of teacher, using the Bible to teach him to read and write.
The Bible at 4.
The sheer weight and moral complexity of those biblical narratives must have been a powerful initial imprint.
His parents, despite his father's often strict and sometimes, stern demeanor, they ensured an incredibly wide-ranging and rich literary exposure for their children. They introduced him to the giants of Russian literature, like Nikolai Karamazov, whose historical narratives shaped a sense of national identity, Alexander Pushkin, Russia's greatest poet, with his blend of romanticism and realism, and Gavrila Державин, an earlier poet known for his odes.
Right, the classics.
But their scope wasn't limited to Russia. They brought in Gothic fiction by Anne Radcliffe, known for her suspense and supernatural elements, romantic works by the German titans Friedrich Schiller and Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, who explored themes of human emotion and philosophical ideals.
Schiller and Goethe, big names.
Huge. And heroic tales from Miguel de Cervantes, like Don Quixote, and Walter Scott, with his historical romances, and even Homer's epics, delving into ancient heroism and fate. The influence of Nikolai Gogol, in particular, with his sharp social commentary and grotesque realism, was incredibly strong. It would resonate throughout Dostoevsky's early satirical works.
He noted himself that his imagination was truly sparked by these nightly readings. It wasn't just passive consumption, it was an active cultivation of his inner world, almost a ritual, communal storytelling that deeply embedded the power of narrative.
And this deep immersion in such diverse literary forms, from the factual histories to the heroic sagas, with the spiritual texts like the Bible to the fantastical and Gothic tales, it laid the crucial groundwork for Dostoevsky's later incredibly complex approach to what he would call realism in a higher sense.
Ah, yes, realism in a higher sense.
He explained this concept to his friend Strokov in 1869, stating that ordinary sensory experiences could only ever capture like 100th part of the real facts.
Only 100th part.
But he believed through what he termed idealism, which was essentially an intuitive, almost prophetic grasp of deeper truths. One could even prophesy facts. This wasn't about fantasy. It was about penetrating to deeper, often unseen spiritual and psychological truths that lie beneath the surface of everyday reality. This vision of realism was directly influenced by his early exposure to both the gritty, factual narratives of the hospital and the grand, fantastical, and deeply moral stories of literature.
So if he saw only 100th part of reality through his senses and the rest through this unique idealism, what's the lightning bolt takeaway for us? It suggests that Dostoevsky wasn't just describing the world as it appears, he was like X-raying the human soul.
Exactly. X-raying the soul.
He believed true realism wasn't about capturing what's obvious, but what's hidden, the spiritual and psychological truths, the underlying currents of good and evil that truly govern our lives and shape our decisions. That's why his characters feel so terrifyingly real, even when they're grappling with ideas as vast as God and freedom. It's a realism that strips away the veneer, revealing the raw, often uncomfortable core of human existence.
Precisely. This foundational understanding, this belief in a higher artistic truth beyond mere natural reality, became absolutely central to his unique artistic vision. His later exploration of profound philosophical ideas within his novels, the problem of good and evil, the essence of belief, the nature of freedom, the struggle for redemption, it's deeply rooted in this early eclectic literary diet. He learned to construct worlds where the mundane intersected with the transcendent, and where characters grappled with ideas on a grand, often agonizing scale, creating a literary space where profound internal conflicts could play out in agonizing detail.
As he grew older, personal losses began to mark his life, carving deeper lines into his already complex psyche. In February 1837, when he was just 15, his beloved mother died of tuberculosis. A devastating blow.
Yeah, just 15.
This tragic event precipitated a significant and, for him, deeply unwelcome change. He and his elder brother Mikhail were sent to St. Petersburg to attend the Nikolaev Military Engineering Institute. This was less a choice and more an imposition of his father's will.
This is a forced shift for Dostoevsky, away from his beloved academic studies and literary pursuits towards a military career, a path he explicitly referred to as a woeful mistake and one long torture.
One long torture.
He found the Institute's atmosphere dominated by physical violence, military harshness, and iron discipline, a stark contrast to the relaxed democratic camaraderie that, for example, Alexander Herzen described among his fellow students at the University of Moscow during the same period. This rigid authoritarian environment was just abhorrent to Dostoevsky's sensitive and artistic nature, and it profoundly shaped his later exploration of the suppression of individual will and the devastating effects of tyranny on the human spirit.
Then, just 2 years later, June 1839, his father died. Officially, it was ruled an apoplectic stroke, a sudden medical event. However, persistent and disturbing rumors circulated that he was murdered by his own serfs, driven to desperation by his harsh treatment.
Right. Those rumors are crucial.
This event is incredibly significant in Dostoevsky's personal mythology because it's believed by some scholars to be when he first experienced symptoms of his epilepsy. Though it's worth noting, later accounts from his daughter, written much later in her life, are considered, maybe unreliable by many contemporary scholars due to their retrospective nature and potential for idealization.
Regardless of the direct link to his epilepsy, the traumatic impact of his father's death coupled with the horrific rumors surrounding it, is undeniable. It likely exacerbated any latent psychological vulnerabilities. It certainly plunged him into a period of deep emotional turmoil. After this profound loss, he continued his studies at the Institute, eventually becoming an engineer cadet and, crucially, beginning to live independently for the first time. It was during this period, unfortunately, that he was introduced to the world of gambling by friends. This wasn't a casual pastime. It was an addiction that would plague him for much of his life, leading to immense guilt, chronic financial distress, and emotional torment that he would later pour into his literary works.
So here we have the groundwork meticulously laid, a childhood immersed in literature and the lives of the poor, which instill a deep empathy and unique artistic vision, a harsh and unwelcome military education that chafed against his spirit, and profound personal tragedies compounded by the emergence of a destructive habit. All of these threads would weave themselves intricately into the complex, often dark, but always deeply human fabric of his future work. It's a powerful foundation for what's to come.
Okay, let's unpack this next transformative phase, Dostoevsky's literary beginnings and his political awakening spanning from 1843 to 1849. This was a period of intense creative output, critical recognition, and ultimately significant upheaval in his life, pushing him further into the socio-political currents of his time. Indeed. His emergence as a writer was quite explosive, almost an overnight sensation. His first major novel, Poor Folk, published in 1846, created a huge stir in the Petersburg literary circles. The prominent literary critic Vissarion Belinsky, a titan of Russian intellectual life, immediately recognized its significance, seeing Dostoevsky as a profound justification for his new natural school movement, a burgeoning social realism.
Belinsky, in particular, was looking for works that move beyond mere physiological sketches or daguerreotypes, which he saw as superficial, focusing only on external description without delving into the inner life.
Right, he wanted depth.
He saw Dostoevsky's ability to produce more than a series of physiological sketches, suggesting a deeper, more imaginative penetration into the inner lives, the souls of his characters. This led Belinsky to view Dostoevsky as a public proof and justification of his opinions about the true socially conscious direction of Russian literature. He famously declared upon reading Poor Folk, "A new Gogol has appeared."
A new Gogol. High praise. But what's truly fascinating here is that Dostoevsky, despite this initial meteoric success and Belinsky's powerful championing, was never solely committed to the strict tenets of the natural school or its later iterations, which often privileged empirical reality.
Oh, interesting.
He maintained strong romantic influences, a point that Belinsky may not have fully grasped in his initial enthusiasm. For example, Dostoevsky openly admired the work of the writer Veltman, whose narratives, as one source notes, shuttle back and forth between the real and the imaginary. And tellingly, he chose an epigraph for Poor Folk from Dostoevsky's Russian Nights, a work deeply steeped in the romantic Schellingian spirit of the 1830s.
That phrase, romantic Schellingian spirit, sounds quite academic. Could you unpack that a bit for us? What does that imply for Dostoevsky's early work and mindset?
Absolutely. Think of the romantic Schellingian spirit as a philosophical current popular back in the 1830s, particularly in German idealism, that deeply influenced Russian thought. It's essentially the idea that reality isn't just about what we could observe with our senses,
Okay.
but that there's a deeper spiritual reality accessible through intuition, emotion, and artistic creation. It emphasizes the unity of nature and spirit, the importance of inner experience, and often involves a search for ultimate truth beyond the purely rational. So when Dostoevsky drew from Dostoevsky, who was a proponent of this, he was signaling that his realism was already infused with this spiritual and imaginative dimension long before he fully articulated his realism in a higher sense.
Right.
He wasn't just taking a photograph of reality. He was trying to capture its hidden spiritual essence.
So he was already hinting at this blend, this realism in a higher sense, even in his early work.
Yeah.
Not just depicting external reality, but exploring the internal, the imaginative, the philosophical undercurrent.
Exactly.
This tension between the visible and the invisible, the material and the spiritual, it's central to his unique style, and it really sets him apart.
Precisely. This period also saw the introduction of a hallmark character type in his work with The Double, also published in 1846. This novel introduced the concept of the internal split between self-image and truth, that agonizing chasm between what a person wishes to believe about himself, how he wishes to present himself to the world, versus what he truly is deep down.
The Double, a theme that would resonate throughout his major novels, tormenting characters from the underground man to Raskolnikov and even Karamazov. Golyadkin in The Double is clearly an ancestor to these later, more complex split personalities.
That's right. What's important to note about The Double is that while these later characters grapple with profound philosophical and spiritual dilemmas through their internal divisions, The Double's framework was still, well, purely social psychological. It explored how a personality could be stifled and maimed under a despotic tyranny, even within the confines of mundane bureaucracy, leading to intolerable guilt feelings at even the most modest aspirations for self-assertion. Golyadkin, a civil servant, is literally driven to madness by this internal conflict, this inability to reconcile his outward persona with his inner truth. It's a profound exploration of alienation long before the term became common.
This internal torment, this psychological fragmentation, really became a signature. We also see the beginnings of another character type in his unfinished novel, Natochka Nezvanova, which he began in 1849. This work features Princess Katya, who is described as the first of Dostoevsky's infernal women.
Yes, the infernal women. These are women whose wounded pride tragically hinders their capacity for genuine love, often twisting it into something bitter, generating hatred and persecution of the lover. It's an early, powerful exploration of how damaged self-esteem and unacknowledged wounds can pervert the most profound human emotions, leading to cycles of pain and control. We see this toxic pride, this inability to humble oneself, played out in more devastating ways in many of his later female characters.
And then, life took a truly dramatic turn. The last installment of Natochka Nezvanova was published without Dostoevsky's name, because by that point, he had been arrested. Here's where his political awakening collided violently with the repressive state.
Indeed. In this period, Dostoevsky, like many young intellectuals, joined a utopian socialist group known as the Petrushevsky Circle. They weren't advocating violent revolution, but they engaged in passionate, often clandestine discussions about profoundly radical ideas for the time.
Like what kind of ideas?
Things like the liberation of the serfs from their feudal bonds and the ending of state censorship, which stifled pretty much all intellectual discourse. These were ideas that challenged the very foundations of autocratic Russia.
He was specifically accused of reading and circulating banned works, particularly Vissarion Belinsky's letter to Gogol, a scathing critique of Gogol's conservative religious views.
Right, a very dangerous text at the time.
Dostoevsky defended himself by claiming he read such texts only as a literary monument, rather than for their incendiary political content, speaking innocuously of personality and human egoism instead. He tried to downplay his involvement.
However, this defense did not save him. On April 23, 1849, by direct order of Tsar Nicholas III, who was consumed by fear of revolution, similar to the Decembrist Revolt of 1825 and the revolutions of 1848 sweeping through Europe, Dostoevsky and his fellow conspirators were rounded up and arrested.
Wow.
They were held in the notorious Peter and Paul Fortress, a grim, imposing structure in St. Petersburg, a place reserved for dangerous convicts and political prisoners, designed to break the spirit.
This political entanglement is so crucial to understanding his future work. It became a personal baptism by fire that reshaped everything. And speaking of pivotal figures, it's also worth noting how he reacted to Belinsky's death. Belinsky died in May 1848, a year before Dostoevsky's arrest and well before their ideological split hardened.
That's right.
Dostoevsky's immediate reaction revealed a deep, almost visceral attachment despite their growing disagreements on aesthetic and social matters.
He reportedly suffered convulsions, a condition similar to the folk term kondrashka, which is like a general term for a stroke or fit, at 3 a.m. after hearing the news.
3 a.m., wow.
This suggests a profound psychological and physiological impact, indicating the depth of his initial connection to Belinsky, who had been such a pivotal, almost paternal figure in his early literary success and recognition. It wasn't just the death of a critic, it was the loss of a mentor, a champion.
And yet, later in his life, Dostoevsky even implied that Belinsky had converted him to atheism. This seems like a complete reversal, especially given Dostoevsky's later profound spirituality. What was the motivation behind that specific claim, given how his own views evolved?
That's a crucial point, and it speaks volumes about Dostoevsky's polemical genius. This later claim about Belinsky was a strategic, almost propagandistic move on Dostoevsky's part.
Really?
Yes. A dramatic reinterpretation intended to underscore his later argument that socialism, in its essence, was inherently anti-Christian. He aimed to show that Belinsky, as a leading socialist intellectual, felt duty-bound to destroy the teachings of Christ, viewing them as deceptive and ignorant philanthropy, and condemning them as irrational by the standards of modern science and economic doctrines. So, Dostoevsky was, in a way, crafting a narrative where his own brush with radical ideas was framed as a necessary detour into the darkness of atheism, a journey from which he would later return to a more profound Russian Orthodox faith, using Belinsky as an example of where purely rational secular thought could lead.
So even his recollections of his past were shaped by his evolving ideological stance, highlighting his genius, really, in formulating the ideas he thought were wrong in brilliant ways in his novels, giving them their full, dangerous intellectual power before dismantling them.
Absolutely.
This period, though ending in incarceration, was a crucible for the complex, often contradictory ideas that would define his greatest works. It's clear his life was always in service to his art, even in its most painful moments. This next segment is truly pivotal in Dostoevsky's life, arguably the most transformative. It's the Siberian ordeal, spanning from 1849 to 1854. This experience, more than any other, reshaped his worldview, deepened his spiritual understanding, and infused his writing with an unparalleled psychological depth and authority.
Absolutely. The trauma began even before Siberia, with a chilling, theatrical event designed to break the spirit, the mock execution. On December 22, 1849, Dostoevsky and his fellow conspirators from the Petroshevsky Circle were sentenced to death for sedition. They were led out into a freezing Petersburg square, tied to stakes, and faced a firing squad.
And then, as one source dramatically puts it, blah, 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 but no one died. It was a mock execution, a common and utterly barbaric Russian tactic used by the Tsarist regime to instill absolute terror and psychological torment. Can you imagine the sheer horror, the minute-by-minute progression from the certainty of death to the sudden, agonizing reprieve?
The traumatic impact on Dostoevsky was immense, a scar that would never truly heal. A memoirist later described how Dostoevsky would vividly evoke the freezing coldness of the morning and the horror that overcame the prisoners as they heard the death sentence being pronounced.
Oh, God.
He would repeat to himself, consumed by the terror, "It could not be that I, amidst all the other thousands who were alive in something like 5 to 6 minutes, would no longer exist."
It's just minutes.
And later, in quiet moments of reflection, he would whisper, "Is it really gone?" Suggesting that the trauma of those minutes never truly left him. It was a psychological wound that continued to echo through his consciousness. It provided him with an unparalleled understanding of the human experience at its very limit, facing annihilation.
So instead of death, he received a hard labor sentence. 4 years in a Katorga prison camp in Omsk, Siberia, followed by compulsory military service as a common soldier. This was effectively a living death sentence, a complete erasure of his former identity and privilege.
And the conditions were brutal beyond measure. He described the prison population as coarse, ill-natured, cross-grained people, largely peasants and hardened criminals, who deeply hated the gentry class.
Right.
They received us, the gentlemen, with hostility and malicious joy in our troubles, making life a constant torture. He found himself isolated, an educated nobleman among 150 enemies, forced to endure constant taunts and physical threats, stripped of all dignity. This wasn't just physical hardship, it was a profound social and psychological alienation.
150 enemies. That must have been an unbearable claustrophobic existence. He noted that the worst torture was compulsory life in common, never being alone for a single minute for 4 years.
Never alone.
No privacy, no personal space, constant noise and vulgarity. This, he was convinced, contributed to the convicts' excessive restlessness and irritability, leading to outbursts of violence and irrational behavior.
This experience profoundly shaped his later belief in the irrepressible demands of the human spirit for individual freedom and self-expression. He realized the vital, almost sacred importance of human will and the grave danger of suppressing that need. He observed how convicts, despite their complete lack of external freedom, would go to immense lengths to assert his will and thus exercise his freedom, taking great risks for temporary and illusory but infinitely precious satisfaction. These small, often reckless acts of defiance, a forbidden cigarette, a stolen moment of quiet, a defiant glare were, for Dostoevsky, profound assertions of individuality against a system designed to crush it. This craving for self-expression, this unconscious yearning for himself, this desire to assert his crushed personality, could erupt in a poignant hysterical craving or fits in nervous convulsions, a harrowing comparison, as he put it, to a man buried alive and awakening in his coffin, frantically beating on the lid, desperate for air.
Oh, that image.
This image of the suffocated soul, yearning for expression, will become central to his later psychological explorations.
That's a powerful and deeply unsettling image, and it clearly links directly to his later explorations of human freedom and the almost desperate will to assert one's personality, even against all odds. a theme we see so vividly in characters like the underground man. But amidst this harshness, he also encountered unexpected sides of human nature, glimmers of surprising humanity and dignity.
Yes, these were the rare, redeeming counterpoints to the pervasive brutality. He observed instances of surprising honesty and devotion, like a convict named Nura, whom the others called a lion.
A lion?
He was good-humored and cordial, worked without grumbling, and was furiously indignant at all the thieving, cheating, and drunkenness around him. He's also exceedingly devout, a man of simple, unshakable faith. Then there was Isai Fomich, a cunning but amusing Jewish jeweler who, despite being mocked and despised by other convicts, found ingenious ways to thrive and maintain his spirit.
Really? How?
Well, he even sang this shrill little chant that he claimed was the very song and the very tune that the 600,000 Jews had sung as they crossed the Red Sea, a bizarre but captivating assertion of his heritage in the most unlikely of places.
Wow.
These small details, these glimpses of unexpected humanity must have been crucial for Dostoevsky, providing proof of the indomitable human spirit even in the darkest corners.
Those small details, those glimpses of unexpected humanity must have been crucial. And in such an oppressive, spiritually barren environment, there was only one book allowed, one source of solace and reflection.
The New Testament. This was not merely permitted, it was his sole companion for 4 years. He studied it intensely, poring over its pages, reading and rereading the stories of Christ, the epistles, the parables. This forced and intimate engagement with the Gospels profoundly influenced his spiritual development. It cemented his faith in the teachings of Christ, not as abstract theology, but as a living, breathing guide for human suffering and redemption. The image of the suffering Christ, embodying self-sacrifice and brotherly love, became deeply embedded in his understanding of the Russian soul and the path to spiritual renewal.
And this enforced intimacy with the Russian masses in Siberia, living among peasants and criminals, led to a monumental spiritual and ideological transformation. He came to believe that the Russian peasants, despite their illiteracy and perceived backwardness by European standards, already had the answers to Russia's social oppression and spiritual malaise.
Yeah, a huge shift.
This was a radical departure from his earlier conviction that Russia should look to Europe for enlightenment and reform.
This was a complete and radical shift from his earlier semi-secularized Christian socialism, which had looked to Western European models for social improvement. He now believed, with almost mystical fervor, in the peasants' instinctive and uniquely Russian grasp of the ideals of Christianity, concepts like self-sacrifice, profound humility, brotherly love, and an innate socialist utopian understanding of life that was rooted not in abstract theory, but in the communal spirit of the Russian village. As Joseph Frank, his biographer, summarizes this shift, Dostoevsky's faith became completely internal, irrational, and non-utilitarian. Its truth, he believed, could not be impugned by a failure to effect worldly changes, nor should it be defended rationally. It was a faith of the heart, forged in suffering, independent of logical proof or worldly success.
So it became a faith less about outward societal reform and more about an inner spiritual truth that he felt was uniquely embedded in the Russian people. And this also fed directly into his developing nationalistic ideas, connecting faith to national destiny.
Yes, that's precisely it. He came to believe, with conviction, that Russia had a unique world historical mission to synthesize European cultures, to reconcile the fragmented West, and that the Russian Christ served as a divine warrant of moral freedom for this endeavor. He envisioned Russia not as a follower, but as the future creator of a truly pan-human world culture, arguing that Russians possessed a unique ease in learning foreign languages and an unparalleled ability to identify and empathize with alien cultures, making them uniquely suited to this universal role.
Interesting.
This belief, born from his time with the common people and his intense study of the Gospels, laid the crucial foundation for his later prakovenchestvo ideology, meaning return to the soil or native ground.
So this Siberian experience wasn't just a period of hardship. It was a crucible of profound inner rebirth, fundamentally altering his spiritual, philosophical, and political compass. This reorientation, almost mystical in its intensity, would animate his later masterpieces and define his unique voice. From the crucible of Siberia, Dostoevsky reemerged, profoundly transformed. This next phase, from 1854 to 1875, marks his reintegration into literary life and a period of incredible creative flourishing, where his personal traumas became the fuel for his greatest explorations of the human psyche.
Yes, and he wasted no time. Upon his release from prison in February 1854, Dostoevsky immediately sought to reconnect with the intellectual currents of his time, asking his brother to send him books by seminal philosophers like Hegel and Kant.
Straight back into it.
Exactly. This shows his intellectual curiosity remained undimmed, despite the physical and mental torment he had endured. He was hungry for ideas, eager to process his experiences through a philosophical lens.
And his experiences quickly found their way into his art. The House of the Dead, published in 1861, was his direct autobiographical response to his time in the Katorga prison camp. It was a groundbreaking work, remarkably, the very first novel about Russian prisons, offering a shocking glimpse into a world previously unseen by the public.
It truly was a monumental work, not just for its subject matter, but for its dual focus. It vividly portrayed the external, material, literal image of the prison, the squalor, the brutality, the daily grind, but crucially, it also explored the internal experience of freedom and life in the House of the Dead.
Right, that paradox.
This paradoxical idea that spiritual freedom and an assertion of individual will could exist even in the most physically constrained and degrading environment was central to his message. It was a testament to the indomitable nature of the human spirit.
During this period, in 1857, he married Maria Dmitrievna Iseva, a complicated and ultimately unhappy relationship. She struggled profoundly with his epileptic seizures, which had begun or intensified during his Siberian years. He wrote of their relationship with poignant honesty. "We were definitely not happy together, but we could not stop loving each other, and the more unhappy we were, the more attached to each other we became."
Wow, that's complex.
They mostly lived apart, a testament to the strain, and she eventually died in 1864 after what he called a real long time of suffering from tuberculosis, adding another layer of grief and complexity to his life.
The physical toll of his ordeal was also apparent. In 1859, his health deteriorated further, leading to his release from military service. He was finally permitted to return to European Russia, marking the end of his official exile, but his personal and financial challenges were far from over.
Indeed. His first trip to Western Europe in 1862 left a profound and often critical impression, recorded in his polemical travelogue Winter Notes on Summer Impressions. Here, he sharply criticized what he perceived as the inherent flaws of Western society: capitalism, social modernization, materialism, Catholicism, and Protestantism.
He wasn't a fan then.
Not really. He saw the monumental Crystal Palace in London, for example, not as a marvel of progress, but as a monument to soulless modern society, a cold, calculating symbol of the myth of progress and the worship of empty materialism, devoid of spiritual depth or genuine human connection.
These European travels, while intellectually stimulating for his critiques, also tragically exacerbated his most destructive personal struggle. His gambling addiction, first introduced in his youth, escalated dramatically during these trips, particularly his obsession with roulette.
Oh, the gambling.
This caused him immense guilt, chronic financial strain, and profound self-loathing.
You can feel the agony in his letters, the raw, unfiltered remorse. He confessed to Anna, his future second wife, "Oh, if only the matter concerned just me. One thing and one thing only horrifies me. What will you say? What will you think about me? And what is love without respect?"
Heartbreaking.
This addiction made him what he often called himself, a proletarian writer, constantly needing advances for his work, churning out novels under immense pressure, and often pawning his belongings, even his winter coat in the depth of a Russian winter, just to make ends meet and pay off debts. It's a stark contrast to the financial stability of his more famous contemporaries like Dickens.
This period of intense personal turmoil, however, proved incredibly fertile for his most significant philosophical novels, as if suffering somehow clarified his vision. Notes from Underground, published in 1864, is a prime example. This short but monumentally influential novella delves deep into the problem of freedom by probing the individual psyche, illustrating with chilling clarity how a free individual can be imprisoned in himself, trapped by his own consciousness, his own perverse logic.
It's often considered one of the very first works of existentialist literature. The Underground Man, a bitter, alienated narrator, famously challenges rational egoism, the utilitarian idea that doing good aligns perfectly with one's self-interest.
Right, the 2 + 2 = 4 idea.
Exactly. He actively chooses to revel in his toothache, embracing suffering and perversity seemingly for their own sake, but really as a defense and assertion of the positive value of moral psychic freedom. He asserts that his most profitable profit is to defy what might be considered instinct or programmed behavior, refusing to close the circuit between instinct and consciousness, defiantly choosing his own irrational will over any rational benefit. It's a radical defense of individual caprice against any totalizing system.
This provocative stance, this assertion of irrational freedom, sets the stage perfectly for Crime and Punishment, published just 2 years later in 1866. This monumental novel was, in part, a direct and powerful response to radical thinkers of the time like Dmitry Pisarev, who proposed that superior individuals, those with exceptional intellect and will, had a moral right, even a duty to commit crimes for the greater good of humanity.
Raskolnikov's infamous theory of extraordinary men, those who can transgress moral law for a higher purpose, is depicted in the novel as leading not to liberation but to overwhelming confusion, paranoia, and disgust.
Utter breakdown.
Dostoevsky refuted these dangerous ideas not by preaching, but indirectly, by dramatizing their horrifying psychological and spiritual consequences on his characters, showing how such theories unravel the soul.
Indeed. The novel reveals Raskolnikov's true motive was not a utilitarian desire to benefit humanity at all, but an egoistic desire to enact his will and show dominance and power over the world. His crime was an act of self-assertion, a perverse experiment to prove his own extraordinary nature. His actions, Dostoevsky shows, are portrayed as being governed not by rational choice, but by psychic forces released through the struggle to overcome the moral resistance of his conscience, as if a part of his clothing had been caught in the cogs of a machine and he was being dragged into it. This highlights Dostoevsky's focus on the internal, pathological psychic predisposition, the inner demons that drive human behavior, rather than purely rational decision-making or external motivations.
A truly crucial turning point in his personal life, offering him some much-needed stability, came in 1866 when he met Anna Grigorievna Snitkina, a 20-year-old stenographer.
Anna, yes.
He was under immense pressure, needing someone to help him quickly write The Gambler to meet a tight deadline and avoid losing the rights to all his previous and future works. Anna helped him complete it in just 26 days.
Incredible speed.
They married only 3 months later. Anna proved to be an incredibly remarkable woman who brought much-needed stability and order to his chaotic life. She quickly discovered that he was bankrolling a couple of human leeches, his stepson Pasha, his deceased brother's widow Amelia and her children, and his alcoholic younger brother Nikolai, leading to constant financial demands that he felt honor-bound to meet.
Oh dear.
Anna bravely stepped in, managing his finances, dealing with his creditors, and even pawning her own belongings to support them and his extended, often parasitic family. She also learned the full severity of his epilepsy. He suffered seizures about once a month, a debilitating illness she cared for him through.
She sounds extraordinary.
Despite these immense challenges, his addiction, his financial woes, his demanding family, and his chronic illness, they found happiness and a profound partnership together for the next 15 years, until his death. Anna was truly his anchor.
And The Gambler, the novel completed with Anna's vital help, deeply wove in Dostoevsky's own agonizing experiences with gambling. The main character is an addicted gambler, seeking a fleeting sense of identity, power, and triumph over his own perceived inferiority and the thrill of the game, yet ultimately feeling buried in some sort of mire of guilt and despair. This novel serves as a powerful, almost autobiographical testament to the destructive, all-consuming nature of addiction and the profound self-deception that accompanies it.
His fascination with his own illness, epilepsy, extended profoundly into his art. The Idiot, published in 1869, featured Prince Myshkin, a character Dostoevsky described as striving to be a perfectly beautiful man, a Christ-like figure, a man of profound innocence and empathy, navigating a morally corrupt world.
This novel vividly explored epilepsy, a condition Dostoevsky contracted in Siberia, detailing its physical and psychological manifestations. He wrote in the letter, with chilling honesty, that the illness gradually deprived me of the ability to remember faces and events. I have literally even forgotten all the themes and details of my novels.
That's terrifying for a writer.
It was a constant threat to his mental faculties.
But he also captured the unique aura or ecstatic seizures that sometimes preceded a fit, moments of fleeting, profound insight. He described it as an instant of deepest sensation overflowing with unbounded joy and rapture, ecstatic devotion, and completest life, even if, as he acknowledged, it was only disease and abnormal tension of the brain.
A strange kind of gift within the illness.
This epileptic time allowed an immediate breakthrough into timelessness, a glimpse of ultimate harmony and truth, a profound paradox of suffering and transcendence.
However, The novel also shows the tragic limitations of such an idealized figure in a fallen world. The prince's beautiful, innocent personality eventually dissolves, overwhelmed by the treachery, moral ambiguity, and intense passions of the world around him, losing his grasp of the real world. This implied that while glimpses of spiritual perfection are possible, they cannot sustain a fully functional existence in a complex, morally compromised society, suggesting the tragic fate of pure goodness confronted by evil.
Then we have Demons, published in 1872, a novel with a clear and searing political critique. It was directly inspired by the real-life murder of a revolutionary student, Ivanov, by the anarchist Sergei Nechaev's nihilist group in 1869, a shocking event that exposed the dark underbelly of radical movements.
This novel launched a powerful, polemical attack on the socialist left and the rising tide of nihilism in Russia, which he saw as corrosive forces threatening the very soul of the nation. He portrayed the transformation of the radical youth of the 1860s into bloodthirsty, criminal-minded fighters in the struggle for existence, characters for whom the player principle, personal benefit, and raw power had completely replaced traditional moral values and spiritual beliefs. He was deeply concerned about the moral vacuum left by the rejection of traditional faith.
It depicted a peculiar, almost perverse version of Darwinist principles, specifically social Darwinism, the idea of a ruthless struggle for existence where strong will devour the weak.
Right, a real distortion.
This was a twisted adaptation of Darwin's more tentative scientific ideas into a nihilistic ethical framework. We later see this chilling logic in The Brothers Karamazov, where Ivan Karamazov uses this Darwinian logic as an abnegation of moral or familial duty, wishing for viper to eat viper. It's critical to remember that Dostoevsky was presenting these ideas to critique and ultimately condemn them, dramatizing their destructive consequences, not to endorse them.
Precisely. His goal was always to expose the spiritual dangers of ideologies that denied God and traditional morality. This period also marked Dostoevsky's significant rise to a truly public figure, extending his influence far beyond literary circles. He left his demanding work at the Citizen magazine in 1874 due to the immense bureaucracy and stress, but then embarked on a new, highly successful venture.
A Writer's Diary, published from 1873 to 1877, was a self-published monthly magazine written entirely by Dostoevsky himself, and it was an absolutely massive hit, transforming him into a national voice.
It was a unique publication, a fascinating blend of personal essays, literary criticism, social commentary, and political prophecy. He masterfully mixed big issues, deep philosophical and political discussions, with accounts of true crime, detailing sensational murder trials and gruesome stories that captivated the public imagination.
He really tapped into something there.
He loved accounts of murder trials and gruesome stories, indicating his profound fascination with the darker, pathological aspects of human nature, a theme that pervaded his fiction.
This unique publication truly turned him into a prophet figure throughout Russia, especially among students and young people who devoured his insights and grappling with the soul of Russia. He had achieved widespread fame, not just as a novelist, but as a spiritual and moral guide for the nation. As we move into Dostoevsky's later life, we see a culmination of his masterworks and the full realization of his enduring legacy, even as his health continued to decline. This period, from 1875 to his death in 1881, truly cements his place as an unparalleled literary giant, wrestling with the most profound questions of existence.
Yes, his health was unfortunately in a continuous and precipitous decline during these final years. In March 1877, he suffered 4 epileptic seizures in quick succession, a stark reminder of the chronic condition that had plagued him since Siberia, slowly eroding his physical and mental vitality.
Then came a deeply personal and agonizing tragedy that struck him to his core. In May 1879, his beloved 3-year-old son, Alyosha, died from a severe epileptic seizure.
Oh no.
For a father who himself suffered from the very same illness, this must have been absolutely devastating, a cruel echo of his own suffering and fears. It was a wound that would never truly heal.
It was indeed. And in August 1879, he was diagnosed with early-stage pulmonary emphysema, a chronic lung condition that his doctor believed could be managed, but certainly not cured. So his health was really failing.
Yeah. The illness progressively weakened him, and he would finally pass away on February 9th, 1881, at the age of 59, after a life packed with suffering, struggle, and astonishing creativity.
But before his death, in a final surge of creative genius, he produced what many consider his magnum opus, The Brothers Karamazov, published in 1880. This sprawling, complex final novel explored the murder of a father within a vast religious and moral philosophical context, touching upon every major theme he had grappled with throughout his life.
It's his final statement, in a way.
This novel perfectly exemplifies his signature technique of refuting the ideas he was combating indirectly by dramatizing their consequences on the fate of his characters. He didn't lecture or write philosophical treatises. He allowed ideas to live and breathe, and then dramatically, often tragically, showed their full destructive power through the lives of his characters. This made his arguments profoundly visceral and unforgettable.
And nowhere is this more evident than in the famous, incredibly powerful passage, The Grand Inquisitor. This central chapter is a profound allegorical poem recounted by Ivan Karamazov, which questions humanity's true capacity for the profound, often terrifying freedom that Christ proclaimed by offering humankind free will.
The Inquisitor, an ancient, powerful figure in the narrative, argues that man prefers peace, and even death, to freedom of choice in the knowledge of good and evil.
A chilling argument.
He asserts that Christ, by offering freedom of conscience and the burden of choice, only increases man's plight, making it a greater source of suffering than any earthly torment. The Inquisitor believes the secret of man's being is not only to live, but to have something to live for, and that most people lack the strength for the agonizing burden of true freedom.
So better to be controlled.
That's his argument. He concludes that humanity must be given miracle, mystery, and authority to be truly happy, to be fed and controlled, even if it means sacrificing genuine freedom and moral autonomy. It's a remarkably compelling argument for the suppression of free will for the sake of universal happiness, presented within a novel that ultimately seeks to refute it through the spiritual journey of Alyosha.
The struggle with faith and doubt, freedom and control is so palpable and agonizing in that section. We also see this in Ivan's struggle, the intellectual brother. His philosophical position, the chilling premise that underpins his worldview, is that without God and immortal life, all things are lawful.
The core of his nihilism.
If there's no divine authority, no ultimate judgment, then any action is permissible. He expresses utter contempt for humanity, believing one reptile devours another, a stark, brutal view of human nature.
His intense internal struggle and subsequent brain fever, a psychological breakdown, perhaps hinting at madness, ultimately lead him to confess to complicity in his father's murder, even though he didn't physically commit the act.
Right, the intellectual guilt.
His true guilt, Dostoevsky implies, lies in his intellectual and moral rejection of Smerdykov's brotherhood, his failure to love his fellow man, and his internal embrace of that viper-to-eat-viper notion. Ivan uses Darwinian logic as an abnegation of moral or familial duty, demonstrating the destructive consequences of such a nihilistic worldview on the soul. His intellectual pride, his cold logic, ultimately leads him to a profound internal despair.
In stark contrast to Ivan's intellectual, tormented skepticism, we have Dimitri's struggle, the passionate, impulsive brother. He expresses profound dismay at physiological determinism, the idea that human actions are simply dictated by biology or chemistry, saying, with a genuine cry of the heart, I'm sorry to lose God. He grapples with whether human actions are simply determined by material forces or if there's a soul, a spiritual component, a capacity for genuine love and redemption that transcends mere physical impulses. This reflects Dostoevsky's own conviction that, besides the animal world, man has the spiritual, a profound belief in the soul's existence beyond mere matter.
This brings us to Dostoevsky's unique aesthetics, what he termed realism in a higher sense, which we touched on earlier. He believed in art's profound ability to convey not only natural or actual truth, but also a higher artistic truth. It wasn't about mere imitation, but about revelation.
He explored the concept of beauty and ugliness through his intense reaction to Hans Holbein's dead body of Christ in the tomb. Dostoevsky was deeply disturbed, yet fascinated by this painting, which depicts Christ's lifeless, decaying body with brutal realism.
Yeah, it's a shocking painting.
He saw this seemingly repulsive image as representing the triumph of artistic and spiritual truth over natural truth, evoking contradictory reactions in the viewer revulsion at the decay, yet profound spiritual meaning in the sacrifice. It was a depiction of Christ's ultimate suffering that challenged easy faith.
His realism in a higher sense was deeply rooted in what scholars call the aesthetics of incarnation. This means dissolving the traditional Platonic separation between ideal forms, like perfect beauty or truth, and their appearance in the imperfect, often ugly, material world.
Okay, so bridging the ideal and the real.
Exactly. It affirmed an unbroken continuity between God and the world, suggesting that the divine is present even in the mundane and the suffering. Crucially, this philosophy allowed him to include worldly ugliness in the Christian beauty, portraying all of human experience, even its most depraved or tragic aspects, as part of a larger, redemptive divine plan. It was his way of defending a profound spiritual representation in art, rather than just superficial imitation.
And finally, his strong nationalism and prophetic role, which became increasingly prominent in his later years. Dostoevsky firmly believed that only Russian spirit has been graced with universality, tasked with uniting nationalities and resolving the deep contradictions he observed in European culture.
A big claim.
He saw the Russian language as uniquely superior in its capacity to translate and embody universal ideas, making Russia uniquely positioned to lead the spiritual synthesis.
His Pakvenichestvo ideology, meaning return to the soil or native ground, was not just patriotism, but a profound spiritual philosophy. It aimed to synthesize the Europeanized intelligentsia, the educated, often alienated elite, with the deeply rooted values of the native soil, which meant the traditional Russian peasantry and their communal Orthodox Christian spirit.
Right, connecting the intellectuals back to the people.
He considered the Russian peasant a higher type of humanity, believing they embodied an innate, intuitive understanding of true Christianity, of self-sacrifice and communal love that the West had lost.
This vision reached its absolute peak at the 1880 Pushkin Festival in Moscow, a momentous occasion celebrating Russia's greatest poet. Dostoevsky delivered a speech on Pushkin that was hailed as a historic event, a moment of national conciliation and profound emotional resonance.
A huge moment for him.
He was called a prophet who dissipated a thundercloud of division and despair and brought about brotherhood among warring factions of intellectuals. Turgenev, his longtime literary rival and ideological opponent, reportedly rushed to embrace him with tears in his eyes.
Even Turgenev.
Wow. This truly marked the apex of his public recognition, solidifying his reputation not just as a writer, but as a spiritual and national guide, a prophet of universal conciliation.
It was a testament to his profound influence and the way his ideas resonated across Russia, bridging divides, if only for a fleeting moment. It was the culmination of a life dedicated to wrestling with the deepest questions of humanity and nationhood.
As we conclude our deep dive into the extraordinary life of Fyodor Dostoevsky, what truly stands out is how his tumultuous journey from the chilling mock execution and years of hard labor in Siberia to the crushing burden of chronic financial ruin and the profound personal tragedies like the loss of his young son was not merely a backdrop to his work.
No, not at all.
No, it was the very crucible in which his unparalleled literary genius was forged, the raw material for his profound insights.
Indeed. His characters' relentless struggles with freedom, with faith, and the terrifying abyss of doubt, and ultimately with the potential for redemption, were deeply, inextricably connected to his own agonizing and ultimately triumphant journey. He didn't just observe the human condition from afar, he lived it in its most extreme and agonizing forms, pouring his very soul onto the page.
And that's precisely why his novels, with their ripping good plots that keep you turning pages and their deep exploration of the ideological climate of the age, continue to resonate so profoundly today, over a century after his death.
Absolutely.
They aren't just stories, they are philosophical arenas where fundamental questions of good and evil, the essence of belief, the nature of suffering, and the very meaning of humanity are confronted head-on with no easy answers.
His enduring power lies in his capacity to pour all of his confusion and all of his longing, all of his remorse and his hope, all of his doubts and all of his faith into his books. This raw, unvarnished honesty, this willingness to wrestle with the most difficult and uncomfortable questions without neat resolutions is what makes his work timeless, intensely relevant, and perpetually challenging for every new generation of readers.
And it leaves us with a truly provocative thought, something to mull over long after this deep dive concludes. Considering Dostoevsky's profound conviction, forged in the depths of suffering, that man was capable of remorse and repentance, and thus the hope of his redemption should never be abandoned, what does his life and work challenge you to believe about the potential for transformation within yourself and society? Even in the face of profound suffering, seemingly insurmountable contradictions, and the deepest human flaws. Think about that, and thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive.